About 6 years, so when I was thinking about Jesus' baptism, I was thinking about the many baptisms that we are witness to in our life. So often, infant baptisms, right, in our tradition. And I, of course, was recalling my daughter's baptism. Some of you were there for her baptism. She was about a year old when she was baptized, and I meant to put one of her pictures up here just to embarrass her and show you, but I forgot. But it's just one of those classic pictures, you know, of like the frilly white dress, her bright blue eyes, the little white headband, even though she was bald, you know, just all the beauty of baptism. And one of the things I love most about baptism, I think, of any of the rituals we do, is it's just a very like clunky and human ritual. Like I've never really seen one go like smoothly because there's so many things involved, right? Like we've got usually a baby or a small child. We have godparents that don't necessarily know where they're supposed to be or what they're doing, you know. We have the oil and the water, and of course we always have a flame, right? We've got a candle, which is never ideal with a little kid, and there's just all that silliness and humanness of it. And that is such a beautiful part of our faith. We come from a tradition that is really immersed in this human stuff, right? We use all these kinds of elements in our faith, whether it's blessing ourselves with water when we come in, or the bread and the wine that we have every day, to the candles, just all these earthy things, right? These things that are about our bodies and what we need. And I'm so grateful that today, after navigating this difficult and heart-wrenching week, that we get to be immersed in Jesus' baptism today. We get to be in that story, that really human story. And what we know is that the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is also our story. That story is about us. It's about navigating the absolutely beautiful and terrible experience of being a human. This is what we get to be immersed in today, knowing that that's what we are going to go out of this space. When I was in grad school, one of the perks of getting your master's in divinity is you get to learn all kinds of weird church things that you would never pay attention to otherwise. And one time I was at a lecture inside a church, and it was kind of about how the church is set up. And it's more like traditional Roman Catholic churches or even just much older churches in general and old architecture. And in most of those churches, the baptismal font and the space where your body is laid at your funeral are the same space. They're connected. And that's intentional. And our baptism liturgy and our funeral liturgy have a lot of these connections and are woven together. Our baptism not only reminds us of who we are in God and what it means to live our life as Christians, but it reminds us that our time here is limited, that we're limited humans, that we're going to die. And our funeral in it includes a promise that this isn't the end, that somehow we believe that there is something beyond this space, and that is so intentional in our faith, that we are holding those tensions of life and death and the whole of human experience from baptism until our death. And having that is there not to be morbid, but to simply remind us, to help remind us of the preciousness of life, and to help remind us of how beloved we are in God. Today, as Jesus steps into his own baptism, he begins to live in that space of his own life between his baptism and his death. This is the beginning of his public era, his ministry. Jesus enters into this space where he will face temptation, where he will feel outcasted, where he will make friends and followers, where he will heal and where he will argue. He will seek to spend time alone and away from the crowds, and he will also sit in a garden and ask God why he left him alone. He will journey through and within an oppressive government that will call his healing ministry the work of evil. And eventually things will escalate so quickly and furiously that he will go from having dinner with his friends to dying 3 days later on a cross. Today and in this whole story, our God, love incarnate through baptism, willingly enters into that beautiful and terrible experience of being human. And so it is here showing up this week, the start of 2026, in a way that we had never imagined, that God is here in this with us, in all the stuff of being human. I know none of us imagined or wanted 2026 to start out this way. I have felt my mind and my body and my heart jumping back and forth between January 2026 and January, February 2020. This fear in 2020 of this unknown virus, now this fear of unknown masked men. The smoke that rose in our city after the murder of George Floyd, and the pleading of our government this week, our local government, to remain peaceful after the murder of Renee Good, so that our federal government would not escalate its violence. The endless news coverage, the spread of viruses, the spread of chaos. Individually and collectively, we are trying right now, in many ways, to survive the terrible part of being a human, the trauma of it all. And in times like this, it is tempting and completely understandable that we would get lost in the chaos of it all, that we might choose hate or apathy to numb out how scared and powerless we feel. But we must hold to the truth that we are not ruled by chaos, we will not be paralyzed by fear, and we will not be hardened by hate. Because these simple rituals that bring us together every week of water and oil, of bread and wine, remind us who we are. We are reminded first and foremost that we are God's beloved. If Jesus' story is our story, then we too are God's beloved. We are God's sons and daughters, and in all of this human experience, in the sheer beauty of it and the inexplicable horror, we are deeply loved. God delights in us, and God cries with us. God knows exactly what it's like to be awake in the dark and feel alone. And secondly, in all of these things, of this bread and wine and water and oil, we are reminded that we are human. And you wouldn't think that we need this reminder, but we do. Our goldfish brains seem to constantly forget that we are creatures. We are creatures that have limits and bounds, and there is no escaping that truth. And so often we attempt to escape that truth. And that really is what we talk about when we talk about sin. And we so often connect baptism and sin together, right? And sin, and I'm talking about sin in the kind of capital S, big sin, the corporate sin that we participate in, that it is not human. To sin is to reject our humanity. It's to cut us off from ourselves and from our community. It is to cut us off from what we truly need. And for many of us, we are seeing that right now. And some of us, because of our privilege, because of our affluency, because of the color of our skin, this may be one of the first times that we truly feel threatened by it, where many, many people have felt threatened by it for lots of human history. We see right now that we are a deeply fractured people. We see communities being severed in so many ways. And like I said, in these kind of times, it's really tempting to delve into that chaos and hatred that has been fostered not only in our community, but in our own hearts and in our own psyche. This week after the murder of Renee Good, I listened to both Mayor Jacob Fry, and Governor Walz plead to the community to stay calm, to come and protest and gather, but to stay calm. because we've heard repeatedly that the federal administration wants chaos. They want any excuse to escalate and use force and violence. Our leaders are trying to help us navigate this public chaos that is occurring. And I think part of our role of coming here to church and being together and supporting one another is helping ourselves tend to the chaos in our own hearts. Because we need to safeguard our hearts and our very beings from chaos. We need to consistently ground ourselves and remind ourselves together about the beautiful limitedness of being human. Because when we are faced with the chaos inside ourselves, it's so easy to go to the things that numb us out. Whether that's alcohol or THC gummies or through endless scrolling on our phones or simply just curling up within ourselves and hardening our hearts to others. And so together as a community, we must counter this internal chaos and do what humans really need to do. We need to rest. We need to cook good food and drink water. We need to make art and sing. We need to laugh with our friends. We need very physical, tactile practices to keep rooting ourselves in the belovedness of being human. It is so scary to face the reality that there is so much beyond our control. But as much as we cannot let our humanness or our limits be interpreted as a weakness, because it is beautiful when we show up together in our smallness, when we let our masks drop, and we show up simply as humans to one another. Near my house, we have a brewery, and Columbia Heights has had lots and lots of ice all over our neighborhood, and people came to the brewery by our house to make art this past Thursday, and they do this regularly. It doesn't have anything to do with what's going on right now, but I finally went this week because of everything that's going on. I've had an excuse for 2 years about why I didn't go and gather with my community, and I finally did. And it was such this beautiful experience. I hated it at first. I'm an introvert. I don't like socializing, and especially not with strangers. And to walk into that place, I was like, oh God, Corein, what are you doing? Why are you here? And I felt that way for like 20 minutes. But then we started to paint together, all these people, diverse backgrounds, being together. And it was one of those experiences where I let my smallness and my powerlessness show up. And when I do that, really the best part of me shows up, right? Like you connect with people, you find people, you make meaning, you figure out how you're going to survive this together. I saw this at work too. I work at United Hospital, and I often go around and check on the nurses on the units and see how they're doing. And it's typically the normal, like, oh, how are you? I'm fine. Yay, I'm good. You know, just all that normal stuff that we as Minnesotans and as humans do. And I was on a unit, and everybody said that to me, like, oh, I'm good. And one nurse said, I'm not good. I want to cry. And she said that in the middle of everybody else gathered there. And that was another example of her being in her smallness and her powerlessness, and it let us connect as a community. It let us let go of those masks that keep the guard up around us. These are just a couple little examples of how we can find out that we are the most powerful when we admit that we are powerless. Throughout human history, empires will always try to convince themselves and us that more power, more gold, more marble will keep them safe, will make them immortal. The Romans did it in Jesus' time, and it's happening all around us right now. But they will face the fact that we already know. It will all end. It will all crumble. It always does. And there is a reason we are baptized into that same place where we will eventually be laid to rest. Because we know the truth, that this experience is finite, that safety is not promised, and that the end will always come. But the beautiful part of being human is living in this experience right now, this beautiful and terrible experience, this place where Jesus walked and is walking with us. And as a community, I believe it's our time to hold up this truth. This is the thing that we can bring to the world. It's not about proselytizing or converting. None of that's important. But it's about joining our neighbors, helping one another calm the chaos in our hearts, offer the balm that our trauma-wrenched spirits need. We come from this beautiful tradition, especially as Catholics, that all these simple elements of water and fire and bread and oil connect us and intentionally keep us bound to this reality, to the here and the now, to the stuff of being human. I think this is what we have to offer to the world right now, to individually and collectively show up and look for where we can show up, to be vulnerable, to be our human selves, and help others do the same, to offer kindness and connection and use that as a catalyst of change that we so desperately need in our own hearts and in our cities and in our nation. I pray that we can figure out to find these ways to keep connecting and supporting one another. I know it's so hard right now, and I think this baptism and our shared connection can support us and help us in getting through this.